Good morning, Grace Fellowship Church, or good afternoon or good evening, I guess, whenever you're watching this. Got some good feedback from our last brief video with just some extra stuff that won't make it into sermons or didn't make it into sermons, and so I just wanted to give you another quick one here. Last Sunday we looked at John 1 to 18, the prologue of John, which we could look at for many weeks to come, and so maybe the question is, why not? And so I'll give you my reasoning, which I took from Don Carson in his commentary. He gives a little bit of explanation or just some advice about preaching through John. And one of the things he says is to select a fairly large unit of text as the basis for each sermon. He goes on, if a preacher takes 6 weeks to expound the prologue and is actually saying anything that has much content, almost inevitably a great deal of later material in John has been dragged in. Far better to deliver one soul on the prologue in one sermon, complete chapter 1 the next week, and proceed at a good pace through the text, so that while the slower preacher is polishing closing remarks on 151, you are already well into the farewell discourse. I think Carson's got a good point. John is a bit cyclical in his writing, brings a lot of themes back in, and so we will keep dipping back into the prologue, and that's why we just did it all in 1 week. So we'll take Carson's advice, though we won't finish chapter 1 this Sunday. We'll take a couple weeks to finish chapter 1, but you'll keep coming back to that prologue often. So given that we can't cover everything about the prologue, just a few brief thoughts about it. One has to do with verse 1 and following as well. It says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. This is a classic text about the deity of Jesus, and it's a classic text that people will take and twist. They'll say it's mistranslated. It should read, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was a God, or the Word was divine. It had godlike characteristics. Everything as far as Greek grammar and understanding of the text itself says that the translation we have that says the Word was God is the best translation. And I think even if we gave that up, which we don't need to, but even if we had to, verses 1 through 18 are so steeped in this idea of the deity of Jesus, that Jesus was God himself, that the mistranslation supposedly of one verse does not take that away. This text is dripping with the deity of Jesus, and so we can have confidence that that core doctrine that we hold to is true, and we have it here and we have it all throughout the New Testament as well. Another note from John chapter 1 has to do with this idea of the glory of God. We read later on in verse 14, we have seen his glory as of the only Son from the Father, full of grace and truth. Some notes that I was reading said that this is tied to the Hebrew word Shekinah, which has to do with the glory of God that would come and fill the temple. And we also know the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. It tabernacled among us. So we're calling back a lot to that Old Testament imagery of the temple. Moses is also brought in here. For the law was given through Moses, grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. And one of the key texts that we go back to over and over again as we study the scriptures is in Exodus 34, and it's probably echoed here by John. You know this revelation of God in Exodus 34, where it says that the Lord passed before him and proclaimed, the Lord, a God merciful and gracious, slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love and faithfulness, keeping steadfast love for thousands, forgiving iniquity and transgression and sin, but who will by no means clear the guilty, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children and the children's children to the third and the fourth generation. It's possible that where it says abounding in steadfast love and faithfulness, that John is recalling those two key characteristics, steadfast love and faithfulness, when he says that Jesus was full of grace and truth. So what we find is that Jesus, who is the Word made flesh, Jesus, who is the one who is at the Father's side, who has made him known, is making him known in the same way that he was made known to Moses. It's not a different God. Jesus is not different from the Father. He is revealing the glory of God in the same way that the glory of God was revealed to Moses. Of course, in a fuller sense than Moses saw. Jesus, who is the Word made flesh and has come among us, has walked among us, shows forth the glory of God in a way that he had never been seen before, and will never be seen again until he returns and we see him in glory. But he has revealed the Father fully, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Some of that may have been a little off in the way that I was saying it. But what I'm trying to say is Jesus reveals the Father in an even fuller way, but in the same vein as what we read in Exodus 34. I believe we have a past sermon, if I'm not mistaken, from Trevor in Exodus 34, and so I'll try to link that in the description of this video. Also want to link to a song that's rooted in John chapter 1, a hymn that I came across last week, and it'll take you to a YouTube video of some folks singing that hymn. But before I sign off, here's just some good application. Remember that believing leads to obedience. It leads to action in John. Believing is not something that's passive. It has to do with receiving, believing who Jesus is. And here's a piece of application from Bruce Milne's commentary on John. He speaks about Jesus as he's revealed here in John 1. And he says, if Jesus Christ shares the nature of God, we are called to worship him without cessation, obey him without hesitation, love him without reservation, and serve him without interruption. To him be all glory forever. Amen.